Have you ever thought that you could build yourself cabinetry? It's not as hard as it seems. I'm going to walk you step by step on how you can do it for yourself. Maybe you have like in your kitchen all this extra space, like very open kitchen, and you're like, what can I do with this space? And then you like go to the store and you buy some little bar cart to fill that space, but it's not right, and you're like, man, I can't afford to spend thousands of dollars on a custom island, but maybe I can do it myself. Well, you're in luck. I'm going to teach you how to do it in this video. Follow along and let's get to work. Right as soon as I finish my cigar.
So this is what we're going to be building, this awesome walnut kitchen island. It may seem a little bit daunting to go head to head with something like this that's so big and crazy, but I really want to show you that it's not such a big deal. First, what I did is I went to my local lumber yard and I picked up several sheets of birch 3/4 inch thick plywood. And you know, you don't have to be building out of birch plywood, but it's just my recommended species to work with. You can also get it from different qualities, from how well they glue the veneer, how flawless the veneer is, how well the plies are, any gaps in the wood inside of the plywood. Those are all different things to take into account when you're purchasing plywood. If you care a little bit more about structure, you want to make sure that that ply is nice. And then you could save a little bit on the outside of the veneer on what species that is, because the inside isn't built out of the same material as the veneer on the outside. So first thing what I did is I took these sheets of plywood and I ripped them down to my width. And so now that I'm building a kitchen island, this back of the cabinet isn't going to be pushed up against any wall. So I'm building this a little bit different than I would with my standard kitchen cabinet, right? So I'm making everything as the total depth minus the 1/2 inch thick back that I would be putting on the entire back of this island. And so I went and cut them down, taking off the 1/2 inch back plus an inch thick face frame material that I will be putting on later. So you want to take off 1.5 inches. And so your standard cabinet should be 24 inches deep minus 1.5 inches, and that's what I cut these sides down to. Now my shop isn't really set up for making cabinets because I usually make tables here at Lighthouse. And so I'm doing this as a project for a friend of mine, and so I wanted to make sure we got a nice video out of it while we were at it. Here you see my little helper, Liv. She came out to help me today on this build. So after I cut these guys down, I'm going to now do the cross cutting. And so the cross cutting with the birch ply is going to be for my partitions inside of the cabinet. And the outside walls are going to be made out of 3/4 inch walnut veneer because we wanted this cabinet to be walnut on the outside. So everything you see will be walnut until you open the cabinet, and then you will see birch plywood. So now your standard cabinet height cabinet should be 34.5, and then you have a good 1.5 inches to play with for your countertop. Now that my shop is not really set up for cabinetry, I went and cut these things down on the track saw. So now I'm going to be taking all these pieces that I cut down on what I could with the table saw, because I don't have like a proper outfeed table for plywood on my table saw. But you can see there that a lot of things would just, big sheets of plywood don't really hold well. So I cut them to length there, and then I went on the track saw and cut them to width. And so now what I'm going to do is take it over to the table saw, and I'm going to be trimming things down for my toe kicks and my cleats. The cleats are going to be the part of the top of my cabinet, the part where we will be supporting the counter and giving a structural box shape support. So these guys, I'm cutting 4.5 inches for my toe kick, which is the standard. And then the cleats, I'm just making them whatever I think is strong enough to hold it. Doesn't need to be a full sheet on top of your cabinet box. So I'm going to take them down to my chop saw, and I'm going to take off the width that I don't need, right? So if my entire cabinet here is 90 inches wide, my 2 3/4 inch sides, I got to subtract that for my cleat and for my toe kick. So we're going to be taking 90 minus 1.5 inches for our cleats and 4 are toe kicks. If that's not making so much sense yet, you'll see when I start getting this thing put together. So I'm just going to go around and I'm trimming everything down to size, making sure that everything's going to fit nice, and go ahead from there. And so these guys too, everything that I'm doing is going to have pocket holes in it, because that's how I'm going to be holding this cabinet together. Because my outside veneers of the cabinet, I don't want any screws, any nail holes, anything seen in there. So I'm going to be pocket holing everything from the inside.
This is a pocket hole machine. It helps you make holes in wood so you can put screws in. I can't believe how cool it works.
So me and Livebug wanted to come to the shop, and she wanted to learn how a lot of the tools work. We're just together making these holes, and this is what's going to hold the cabinet together, like I said, but also in this part particular, we'll be holding on the face frame to the cabinet. So the face frame is going to be covering the edge of the plywood that you see that is raw. And so everything's getting these pocket holes. We're going to be also doing them here on the sides, because that's the side pocket hole is going to be holding together the box. We're going to be screwing the cabinet together with the box. Not only with some pocket hole screws, but also we'll be putting glue there. We want to make sure that this thing is really structurally sound, because I'm making everything as if it was one cabinet. In reality, it's about 4 or 5 different cabinets, but I'm making everything as one cabinet. Now, these are my sides, my 3/4 inch walnut ply sides, and I'm going to be cutting out the toe kick here, because this is where we'll see is going to be a space for where your foot can go in, and that's what is called a toe kick. When you're up against the sink or you're up against the counter, you have space for your foot to fit underneath, and it's usually about a 3-inch depth. 3-inch including the face frame. So now we'll take it over to the table saw, and we're going to notch out these little squares. And this first cut that I'm doing, we have to make sure that we measure to the outside of the blade. It's not the inside of the blade, because we're kind of cutting this thing backwards. And then we're going to be doing the top cut, which is on the inside of the blade. I don't know if that makes much sense to you, but it's exactly where your line should be. So whenever you're cutting these, just make sure you measure from your fence to your blade to see exactly where you're going to be cutting. And also, I raised my blade as high as I could just to make sure that the inside cut, because you see that the blade is circular, the inside cut doesn't cut as deep as it would be if the blade was lower, because you have more of a radius there. Here you'll see exactly how much I was able to save on that. But again, we're going on the other side, and this is the opposite of what I was cutting on the previous panel, because one is the left and one is the right. So each measurement of what I'm cutting is going to be a little different. And there you see, raising the blade gives me a minimal cut. Now I'm going to take some rough stock of walnut, 8/4 walnut, and you can get this already milled down at your lumber yard if you don't want to do it yourself, but I already have this wood in my shop for tables, but I'm milling it down to a little bit over 1 inch so that I can plane it down later to get exactly 1 inch thick by 1.5 inch material that I'm going to be using to make my face frames. And so now I'm going to be going around. I already made a rough measurement on where I want each cabinet to be divided, how big each cabinet in this entire island was going to be. And so I'm going to make sure that my first cut is exactly where it needs to be, because this is going to be the style and not the rail. The rails are 1.5 inches, so I'm taking 90 inches of the entire length of my cabinet minus 3 inches, because you have 2 rails that are 1.5 inches. I went beforehand and made myself a nice cut list of all the pieces that I was going to need for this face frame, because I had a specific microwave that needed to fit inside of one of the cabinets. I have pre-ordered trash cans that need to fit in there. There's a sink that's going in there with a tilt tray. So everything had to be exactly to spec. And so I made a cut list beforehand, making sure that everything would fit. And then I took every single piece of this material, every single piece of this face frame, and I made a list of it on how long each one needs to be. So that way I could just go mill a bunch of stock and just cut a bunch of pieces to what my cut list said to, and it made it easier to just get everything done at once. And then later kind of go like a little jigsaw puzzle and figure out exactly which one needed to go where. And then I would just screw them together. This face frame also is going to be all attached together with pocket holes. and then later on I'll screw them together and then give the entire frame as one a good sanding. Now, everything that I'm putting together has wood glue. It's so important to make sure you always have wood glue when you're building, because the screw could come loose, it could twist a little bit, and then your face frame won't be flush anymore. You can have two pieces that protrude one or the other. And so here I made a little bit of spacer blocks to make sure that I get all of my rails in the exact spot. Not measuring, just get a spacer block, put it at the top, and then put at the bottom, and that way I know I have exact same distance from bottom to top. This can give you issues if you don't get the exact same distance from bottom to top in your cabinet, because let's say you have a drawer bank, or you have a specific trash can, or doors that need to fit exactly inside of there, and you're a 16th or an 1/8 inch off. It can mess everything up, and you'll have to go back and adjust doors. You'll have to go back and maybe trim down drawer boxes, and nothing's gonna fit if you just because you didn't take a little extra time making sure that everything was perfectly parallel. Now I'm gonna be going in and putting in the rails for the drawer boxes and for the trash can and for the microwave cabinet. And these are just pieces that are fitting in exact same size as what my spacers were, and I just pop those in, measuring from the top down how big each drawer needs to be. So my drawer boxes will be about 3/4 inches smaller top to bottom than my spaces that is going in now, and they'll be 1 inch smaller from side to side, because my drawer slide is going to take up 1/2 inch gap on left and right of the cabinet. That's really important to make sure that it fits right, because if it's a little bit snug, your drawers are not going to be closing or opening properly. Same problem can happen with doors. Depending on the door hinge that you're using, you can have some adjustment in there, but if you're too far off, your doors could be rubbing up against each other, and you might need to be either making new doors or trying to fix a catastrophe. And that is not something you want to be wasting time on. So just make sure when you're making the face frame, you put as much time and energy and thought into where you're putting these sticks, where you're putting your rails, which are the pieces that go side to side, and where you're putting your stiles, which are the pieces that go up and down. Now we're going to be putting together our carcass, our cabinet, our box, our main structure, if you will. So I'm going to be screwing my toe kick to the side panel. So you see my side panel on the right has walnut veneer on the outside, and the toe kick and everything else has birch veneer. That's because that walnut is going to stay like that. That's why I want to make sure I screw from the inside to keep that side panel intact. No holes, no nails, no nothing. And no, this video is not sponsored by Ethica, my underwear brand. I know most of you are going to be asking. Anyways, it's okay that I have pocket holes on the inside because there's going to be drawers inside of there. It's going to be a drawer bank. And so the drawers themselves are going to hide those holes. If it were an open cabinet with doors, I would have done this a little bit differently. I would have put the pocket holes on the outside of the cabinet, and I would have put another veneer, another piece of plywood to hide those pocket holes. Like an entire new side, just to hide those holes. Just to make the cabinet as clean as I possibly can. So now you see it, I've got my bottom fit perfectly in there because it's the same width as my toe kicks were, and everything's coming together really nicely. Later on, I'll be putting in a couple more partitions in the toe kick just to get out that bow that's in that toe kick there, give it a little bit more structure. But I'm going to be attaching this floor base also from the bottom where nothing will ever be seen. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to drill some holes in the toe kick just so I can get my drill inside there to screw on the face frame. Now I'm going to take my face frame and I'm going to give it a dry fit just to make sure I measured everything up nice and good. So my face frame there fit well. I have made my face frame at exactly 90 inches, and I made the entire cabinet a little bit less just so that my face frame has about an 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch overhang over the cabinet, just in case there's a little wiggle room there. Now this is the cleat that I was talking about. I should have probably thought about doing this a little bit smarter and asked somebody for help to hold this thing with me, or just clamped a clamp to the right wall just to help me hold this, but Me just trying to get it done, I just went there and just started screwing away. But anyways, this is the cleat. So this is going to be screwed to the face frame to help secure the top of the cabinet, but it's also an important part to make sure that my box is square and structural. So now go in and put in the back cleat, and you see that that's going flush with the back. If I were going to build a normal cabinet that goes up against the wall, I would be putting that in a 1/2 inch inset, because in a normal cabinet, what I would do just to help a little bit more of the structure is put a 1/2 inch back on the entire back, but it would be inside the side walls of the cabinet. So that means that my cleat, the back cleat, would need to be a 1/2 inch in, and my cabinet base, my cabinet floor, would need to be a 1/2 inch shorter to fit in a 1/2 inch back. But in this case, I'm going to be putting a solid piece of plywood to cover the entire back. And I'm doing that just so that everything has a nice clean line and everything is flush. Now, here go my partitions. So you can see that my partitions are cut a little bit shorter than my sidewalls because they had to be cut due to the floor of the cabinet. So if I made these in several cabinets and wasn't all just one cabinet, this piece would have to go down to the floor. I would need another piece of plywood for the neighboring cabinet, and instead building it all as one, I can just use one piece of plywood as a sidewall, as opposed to having 1, 2, 3, 4 extra pieces of plywood needed to cut for partitions. So this saved me time, also made everything as one square cabinet, and I didn't need to go around during the install process to make sure each cabinet was level. All we needed to do now was just level one large cabinet, which made things a lot easier also. So as I'm putting in these partitions, I am intentionally choosing a side that is flush with the cabinet, the face frame of the cabinet, just to make sure that my drawer box has no gap and is nicely snug up against the plywood and the face frame. Now here, we're gonna make ourselves some cool little corbels. So the client wanted to have an overhang around this island that the countertop will be sticking out, and I wanted to make sure not only it looked good, but that the countertop, the granite, would never crack. So I made him a couple corbels just to support that overhang of the cabinet. So first I made myself a little jimmy rig template out of cardboard off of just a drawing out of my mind of what I wanted these corbels to look like. And then I used a little can to make sure that radius was round. And then I cut it with my all-time favorite pocket knife. The Swiss Army pocket knife is great because it has everything I need for camera equipment, and it has everything I need for quick cuts. I'll have a link for this down in the bio if you guys want to buy one of these, but I always carry this thing around with me. So now that I got my template cut out on the cardboard, I'm going to take that piece of cardboard and trace them on these little blocks I made. So I got a nice little angle there. And I didn't necessarily make any specific angle there because they're all going to be the same angle because of my template. Then run them over to the bandsaw and just trim these bad boys out. Now we need to get that bandsaw blade cleaned up. So I'm going to walk it over to my sander and just tap it up against there and make sure everything gets, all those blade marks get sanded out. Make sure it feels and looks nice and clean. It is helpful if you have a spindle sander or some kind of oscillating sander for projects like this, but you can do it by hand, but it will take a decent amount more time. But investing $150 in a spindle sander can save you on little projects like this. So now I'm just going to go out over to my cabinet, and I'm going to put them in a spot where I think they would look good. So first one I'm just going to put in, and then the second one I'm going to measure so it's the exact same distance from the end of the cabinet. That way everything is nice and symmetrical. So here you see I'm going about 2.5 inches in. So I'll put my top screw in, get that thing secured, and then I will be measuring to make sure that it's nice and parallel. It's also important to note that this guy should be perfectly flush with the top of the cabinet, because when I go to install this, I'll be leveling from the bottom. I'll be putting shims underneath the cabinet to raise up to make sure things are level. We don't want to have any gaps here that is supposed to be structurally holding granite, but you have an 1/8 inch gap allowing for the granite to crack. So if it's perfectly flush with the top of your cabinet and the bottom is level, then the granite will be sitting nice and flat on your corbels. So now I'm going over to the back. Got the side done. I got the 2 corbels put in on the side of the cabinet. Now I got to put my back on. And the back is also going to have several corbels as well. So that's my next step. Just going to cut this guy down with my track saw to the length of the back. And then cut it with the track saw to the height that it needs to be. Because as I said before, it's a pain in the butt to be cutting big sheets of plywood like this on my table saw setup. And it just seems to be and work much easier to just trim it down with a track saw. When I get them milled up a little bit more, get them cut down, then I move them over to the table saw and cut smaller pieces that I already have cut from my track saw. So here we go. I'm just going to tack this guy on just to make sure that it's flush, because I want to make sure also that this piece is flush at the top of the cabinet. Not so worried about the bottom of it because I will have trim covering everything there. But tack that on just so that it doesn't slide down, and I make sure that it's nice and flush. Now I'll be going and putting on my corbels, and I put one on the left, and I'll go measure the same exact thing on the right, put one on the right, and then I have a third one that I'll be putting directly in the center of the 2 of those. So I'm just going to sneak around the back inside of the cabinet and make sure those screws are nice and snug and straight and level with the top. And here we go with the center one. Another thing that I will be adding to this is some scribe molding. It's little pieces of walnut wood that will be pushing from the bottom of the cabinet all the way under that corbel. I wanted to put those in there just so that those screws or nothing sneaks down, slips down a little bit from after being installed and after the countertops are installed. Just a little bit of extra support to hold this guy up. There you see I'm working on my base trim. I just took 2-inch thick stock and I cut it down to 3/4 inches thick, and I'm just wrapping it around, mitering it. And so here you see I'm burning 1 inch. I like to burn 1 inch when I'm making any exact cuts and not use the tip of the tape measure, because you have a good 1/8 inch play there, and if you're pulled out or you're pushed in, it might not be exactly where you want your line to be. So I burn 1 inch and then just have to remind myself, add 1 inch to whatever measurement I'm supposed to be cutting at, and this always works for me. 25 years installing kitchen cabinets, this has always been one of the best tips to make sure that you have great miters. You can even leave a good hair stronger and then go back and trim it down if you need to. So I'll be putting wood glue and CA glue on my first miter, because I want to make sure that these 2 guys line up perfectly. That way, if you put CA glue to hold your miter before you apply it to the wood, you can just slide it up and your corner already looks perfect. This is a good tip also to remember, because if you're putting a cabinet up against a wall and the wall is a little bit crooked, or your cabinet might be a little bit crooked, at least your miter is perfect. And now you can pre-glue it and then stick it in the corner it needs to go to, and not have to worry about prying it out, pushing something in, because you already have your miter perfectly in line. Now on this side, because I already know it fit well and I dry fit it with a scrap piece of 45 cut trim molding, I just went and attached the rest of the pieces. And now because I put on the back panel over the entire cabinet, I have exposed plywood on the sides. So I just made another additional piece of scribe molding and attached it there. And these are those structural pieces I was talking to you about that are going to give me a little help to make sure that these corbels hold up the granite over time. I just measure it from side to side and make sure I'm perfectly straight. And I'll be doing this on all 3 corbels. On the left side, on the side of the cabinet, I didn't add these scribe moldings because we're not having nearly the same amount of overhang over there. So it's only about 4-inch overhang there, and on the back we have over 12 inches. So I want to make sure that this thing holds right. Now that we got everything put together, it's time to do some finishing. Let's spray this bad boy. Here I'm using ML Campbell's Polarian. It is my go-to spray finish. My go-to finish is Rubio Monocoat. But if anything's going to be having a sink in it, going to be getting wet, going to be built for outdoor furniture, I always like to spray with this stuff. ML Campbell's Polarian is great for water resistance. It holds up well and, takes a good beating. You know, you can scratch it, you can hit it with the broom, you can throw your keys on it, and you don't get very many big scratches in it using this stuff. So I've sprayed this stuff on hundreds of pieces of furniture and have never had any complaints. Where I did when I was using poly or just traditional lacquer or varnishes, things would scratch easily. So I just wanted to find a good varnish that was going to hold up over time. Yes, I know what you're going to say. Lucas, there's so much spray in the air. I get that all the time lately. That's because my electrician hasn't come and hooked up my vent properly yet. So I just got a fan sucking that out until that gets done. But here you go. Here is the kitchen island. Next video, I will be making the doors and drawers. So stay tuned and follow us for that. Please give me a subscribe down below. And thank you for watching.